Well, we'll get started with our workshop, and I'd like to introduce our presenter today. We have Eryn Correa. She is the co-founder and managing partner of Crivella, Correa, a law firm built by entrepreneurs for entrepreneurs. Prior to founding her own firm, Eryn worked as an in-house securities and board governance counsel for Alcoa Corporation and in private practice for K&L Gates LLP in both their Pittsburgh and Dubai office. Eryn serves on the board of Okio Credit US, a nonprofit social investor in sustainable Pittsburgh. She is also a fellow in the Royal Society for Encouragement of Arts, Manufacturing, and Commerce. So Eryn, I'll let you get started.
Great. Hello, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Good. Like Allison said, my name is Eryn Correa, and I really appreciate you guys being here today. I know almost a year in, Zoom presentations are a lot, and I'm very excited about talking to you, and so excited that you are here to listen. Allison gave a great introduction, and I say I would only edit it slightly because it's a part of the story that I don't generally put in my professional bio. But what it should say is that prior to starting my own firm, I worked for a year in a coffee shop. I was in private practice in big law for about 5 years and realized I was getting far away from the people I wanted to help and the populations I wanted to work with. But what this really means practically is I can write your operating agreement and make you a killer vanilla latte. But what it took was this year of really honing who it is I wanted to work with. And I knew that social entrepreneurs are the population that I cared very passionately about. And what you'll see in this presentation is that I do care very passionately about social entrepreneurship and social enterprise. But my goal here is both to give you an underpinning with the theory and some practical guidance for the things that you should be considering as you're starting your own social enterprise. Before we do get started, I do have a few asks for you. To the extent that you feel comfortable, I would love for you to keep your cameras on. Transitioning to virtual is difficult, and any feedback that I can get from your faces is very much appreciated on my end. Second, as Allison said, this should be interactive. If you have questions at any point, please feel free to ask them, in real time, put them in the chat box. We'll also have time for questions at the end. But I really do love to hear from you, and I love to see you. But with that, my first question for you is, could you show by a show of hands who here is a social enterprise or is considering incorporating as a social enterprise? Okay, I see a couple. And anybody who wants to share why it is they've decided to become a social enterprise or why it is that is something that they identify as. I'll give you a couple of seconds if anybody wants to be interactive, and if not, I understand. All right. Well, if you do want to,
I'm willing to, but I don't want to take on the air.
Oh no, please go ahead.
Well, we started at CMU as a nonprofit project. So what makes us go is making the social impact. But the funding model for nonprofit projects is a little challenging in terms of sustaining your work for long term. And in order to make impact, we felt like we need to keep at it for years. And this is where we're trying to shift to a business entity.
Great, thank you. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well, about funding considerations as we go on. So I appreciate that input. Anybody else want to chime in? All right, I'll let you off the hook, but please, I would like this to be as interactive as possible. I'm happy to hear your voices and see your faces. So let's see. First, here's our agenda for today. We're going to be talking about what a social enterprise is, why you should be a social enterprise or why you should consider, the risks of being a social enterprise, how you balance those risks and your commitment to your social mission. We'll touch very briefly on fundraising considerations because often the question that I get when talking about social enterprise. And then finally, how we take all of this and translate it into workable guidance for you as you're starting your organization. So first, what is a social enterprise? The way I will be talking about it today is social enterprise is a for-profit, mission-driven organization. It means it's moving away from the traditional idea of a corporation that's focused purely on the bottom line or purely on shareholder return. And instead, we're looking at corporations and organizations that are focused on what's called the triple bottom line, focusing on people, planet, and profit. In other words, you'll also hear me use the word stakeholders. So moving away from an organization that's focused just on profits and shareholders to organizations that, when making decisions, take into account multiple stakeholders, meaning the employees of that organization, the society, community in which that organization operates, and the environment. And to me, a helpful example to keep this in mind is looking at Patagonia. So Patagonia itself is not an organization that is looking to solve social or environmental issues directly with the goods and services it provides. But the way that it runs its organization, it's very much stakeholder focused and very much considered a social enterprise. They have world-renowned employee benefits, they treat their customers very well, and they're also stewards of the environmental issues that they care about. And in this way is the kind of organization that I will really be talking about, and what I mean when I talk about a social enterprise is an organization that is running itself in a way that it takes into account maximizing its positive impact on all people that are impacted by the decisions it makes. And to that end, why be a social enterprise? Why incorporate these values into the way that you operate? And I like to show these two clips as opposing ideas of what this looks like. The first one is, what are traditional corporations and what they look like? And it is a trailer from a movie called The True Cost about the fashion industry. And everybody see that okay? And can everybody see that? Good, yeah, okay, good.
Wait, sorry, are you playing the video or are we supposed to go to it?
Yeah, Eryn, we're not seeing the video.
Okay.
Need some chat notes for that too.
All right, let me fix that for you. Sorry, that's very difficult to hear if you're not seeing what I'm seeing.
You might have to unshare and reshare
Okay, thank
to
you.
get just the video. Yeah, it's probably only doing this frame.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's see. Okay, well, I will not then play these video clips for you, but I can explain to you what's going on. And when you go back to look at the PowerPoint, hopefully then you'll be able to see what was happening there. But really there's two clips that I like to show. One is from a movie called The True Cost, which talks about the fashion industry. And the reason I like playing this clip in particular is because I think it's an extreme example of what we're seeing today with terms of profit maximization being the only way that corporations are operating. Not the only way, but the default way that corporations are operating. The fashion industry is the second highest polluting industry behind oil and gas. It has rampant human rights violations and also is known for its environmental pollution. And for that reason, I think it's a very good example of, okay, when we allow profit maximization to run amok, it looks like this. It looks like we're exploiting people to the point that, you know, that we see and we're understanding in the fashion industry. The counterexample I like to give is actually pretty close to home. It's from Alcoa. the former CEO, Paul O'Neill, he was credited with focusing on workers' safety. He was the first outside CEO that Alcoa had brought in when they did in the 80s. And he focused very heavily on making sure that anybody who showed up to work at Alcoa did not leave injured and was able to return the next day. People thought he was crazy for undertaking that kind of focus when he worked in the aluminum industry. But what he showed is in that focus on on worker safety, he was actually able to increase the market capitalization of Alcoa significantly over his tenure. And to me, this is a good example of what we're talking about too with social enterprise. Alcoa is not an organization that is solving a social issue directly with its goods and services, but in the way that it was run and the way that it is run is looking at treating people fairly, and in that sense, maximizes shareholder return through that lens. And so this is being borne out again and again when looking at big public companies and their stock market performance. And we can see over the last couple of years that companies that do engage in what is called stakeholder decision making and taking into account multiple stakeholders and not just the shareholders do enjoy better financial returns. And you can read those statistics again, which say again and again that this is a great way to be running a company, which again is all well and good for big public companies. But what I think is important now is, okay, we can understand that social enterprise is a good way to make a good profit, but that what we're looking at is public companies. How is it that you, the social entrepreneur, take that at the level where you are and incorporate it in a way that is meaningful for you? More so, what are the risks that we're talking about when you're trying to incorporate these values and this mission and this mode of thinking as you're starting out? And so that's what we're going to talk about first, is what are the risks? And especially as a lawyer, we love to talk about the risks. That's what we spend all our time thinking about. That's what you hire us to think about. So first, I'm sure you've heard of an entity called a benefit corporation. We'll talk more about what a benefit corporation is, but it is a legal entity, and it's a new legal entity, I think at most maybe 10 or 11 years old. And as such, the risk with incorporating as a benefit corporation, even though you have a huge commitment to your values and say that you will be doing stakeholder decision making, is that it is new. We're not quite sure how the courts will respond to it. We're not sure how it will be sued, what its responsibilities will be. And so this is one thing to be taking into consideration. Second, the whole reason you form an entity as you're starting a business is to protect yourself from expanded liability. Well, what we understand is with benefit corporations is that there might be that expanded liability, because what you're doing is you're taking on additional accountability for a greater share of people. Greater accountability may mean greater responsibility, in which case means greater liability, at least from a lawyer's perspective. So it's something that we'll talk more about how you can protect yourself against that. Additionally is looking at additional business or reputational risk. You hold yourself out as a benefit corporation that is committed to multiple stakeholder values, but then are found to be the one polluting the oceans or engaged in racist hiring policies. This can hit you a little bit harder than it would be if you were a normal corporation. Additionally, a risk is your investment opportunities. What you're saying when you're saying, I care about multiple stakeholders, is you're telling your investors you don't care solely about maximizing and protecting their investment. Now, there is some pushback on that, and that these can be good investment opportunities, but it is still something that is a risk in when you're starting your business. And finally is the financial cost as you're starting. Not only financial cost, but resources cost. So the financial cost meaning, what is it that it takes to incorporate this way and incorporate this kind of thinking this way? But more so, what are the resources that you're going to have to dedicate to it as you are starting out? And so now I've taken you from the highs of you can make a lot of money in adopting this kind of decision making, and it comes with a lot of risk. And this is where, I think you really tap into the entrepreneurial spirit that you're bringing to the organizations that you are involved with, is that there's always going to be risk in what it is that you're undertaking. And the challenge is how do you balance that risk? And to me, it looks like this. You can have a high commitment to your values. And by high commitment, what I mean is, how are you going to put bumpers in so that when your mission and your values butt against your profit, that you can ensure that your corporation is going to still be following the mission that it set out for itself, which that kind of commitment at this point comes with a high legal risk and could be a high financial risk. The other side of the scale is a lower commitment, and there are ways to incorporate your values without going as far to the other side of the scale, but at the same time, and that also comes with a lower risk. And so what we're going to be talking about is, how do we balance those two things? How do we incorporate that into what you're trying to do? And from a legal standpoint, here are the options that you have. First, in each one of these, we'll talk about more. You can incorporate as a benefit corporation. Second, you can amend your existing governance documents, your bylaws, your operating agreement, or draft new governance documents to incorporate certain stakeholder decision-making into what you're already doing. Third, you can draft corporate policies that incorporate your mission and values internally. And finally, there's this concept of B Corp certification, which is a third-party sort of certification, which is one I sort of struggle to categorize, and we'll talk more about why that is. So first is benefit corporation. So we talked about a benefit corporation is a legal entity. So if you're going to go onto the Pennsylvania Department of State website and you download the form to incorporate as a corporation, there'll be a series of boxes up near the top, and one of them that you can check is benefit corporation. In doing so, you are subject to Pennsylvania law on benefit corporations, meaning you make your commitment to stakeholders legally binding. Second, you're required to appoint a benefit director and a benefit officer. And these are people who make sure that your organization is upholding its legal duty to the stakeholders and also pursuing your general public benefit. Third, you're required to file an annual benefit report in Pennsylvania, which shows how you were successful in obtaining your goals or why you were not. And finally, the law provides you protection for your directors and officers. So, for example, you're legally required to consider the environment in your decision-making as a benefit corporation. But this does not mean that if you were to make a decision that then polluted the ocean, that Save the Whales could then come sue you for polluting the ocean. Now, you might be subject to environmental liability under a different environmental statute. But what we're saying is, with benefit corporations, you do not open yourself up to additional liability simply for being a benefit corporation. In fact, the only people who can sue you for failure to uphold your mission are the corporation itself, the directors, or the shareholders. So, as we were talking about earlier with expanded liability, yes, there is some potential additional exposure. At the same time, the benefit corporation statute anticipates that and tries to soften that blow and provide protection for you as you're pursuing your mission. And from a practical standpoint, the costs of this are about as much as you would expect to pay for a regular corporation. So you have $125 filing fee in Pennsylvania or $70 amendment fee. The annual benefit report is $70, and it must be published publicly either on your website or be made available. You're going to incur lawyer's fees in drafting your bylaws and your operating agreement. It might be a little bit more expensive than normal because this is a specialty document that might not be what all lawyers are familiar with. It might require more research. And you might also incur lawyer fees in drafting your benefit report. So there are additional costs that you will be incurring and additional time. The resources that you would have to put forward to have your benefit director, have your benefit officer, and write your annual benefit report each year are going to be considerations you should think about when you're determining whether or not at this stage in your development, whether you want to be a benefit corporation. Next would be amending or drafting corporate documents. So if you have your benefit corporation sort of as your highest level, the next thing you can do is take your existing legal entity. So say you're already a corporation, you're already an LLC, and amend your documents so that they incorporate certain concepts of the benefit corporation law, but you're not held to all the same standards. And you can kind of pick and choose within the boundaries of existing Pennsylvania law as to what you want to hold yourself to in those documents. And so the biggest thing really, I think, from a startup perspective is, say, you don't have the people to have a benefit director and a benefit officer, or you don't have the time and resources to write this annual benefit report. You can make your stakeholder considerations legally binding. You can provide protection for your directors and officers, but don't incorporate, having to write the annual benefit report. Don't make yourself have a benefit director or benefit officer. And so it provides you a little bit of wiggle room as you're growing to make a commitment to your social mission, but not have the same burden of the time and resources. In terms of cost, it's about the same. So $125 one-time filing fee if you're a new entity, $70 if you're amending. And then your lawyer fees, which again will be a little bit more expensive because they are specialty documents in drafting or amending your corporate documents. A lower risk option might be the corporate policies. So these would be your internal policies, like a hiring policy, a code of conduct, a diversity, equity, inclusion policy. Policies that set the mission and culture internally for you, but are not likely outward facing. And because of this, what you can do is start from an early stage to set the groundwork for the kind of organization you would want to run, but they don't carry legal liability. Very rarely, if at all, will you be sued for having violated your own code of conduct. Doesn't make you a great employer, but it doesn't mean you have legal liability associated with it. That said, you can be held responsible for violating policies such as the sexual harassment policy or non-discrimination because those have legal underpinnings to them. But other policies, give example, I'm working with an organization on their DEI, their diversity, equity, inclusion policy. And it's great. It is a clear delineation of their values when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion. But it is just a statement of those values. And in violating those values, again, not a great look, but it doesn't have the same weight as, actually, as you would if you were incorporated as a benefit corporation and failed to pursue your general public benefit. In terms of costs, these are either your lawyer fees in drafting these corporate policies, or a lot of times you can do them yourself. So it's a very low cost as well. There are a lot of different policies that are available online. A lot of people are making policies available online. And so it's easy if you have the time to sort of pull these together. And finally is B Corp certification, which I said I sort of struggled to put within our, risk mission balancing. And the reason is because it is a third-party certification, similar to like LEED certification, Fair Trade Organic. It's a stamp of approval that a third party, it's called B Labs. They're a nonprofit run out of Washington, D.C. And to do this, you have to go through a pretty intensive impact assessment. You have to achieve a minimum score, and you must recertify every 2 years. Now, on the one hand, this seems not so bad because it's a certification. And if you were to lose that certification, embarrassing, but it does not have, legal liability associated with it. That said, B Lab, if you are in a state that has benefit corporation legislation, will make you incorporate as a benefit corporation. And if you are in a state that does not have benefit corporation legislation, will make you adopt certain policies into your governing documents. So on the one hand, it could be pretty easy. It's not, the impact assessment is not an easy assessment. But it does force you into becoming a benefit corporation. So there's that legal liability associated with it. The cost of the certification itself is graded. It's based on your annual sales, and I think it starts around $1,000 and can be up to $50,000, but that's if your annual sales, are over $1 billion a year. There are lawyer fees in drafting the certification if you choose to have a lawyer involved with it, but also the impact assessment itself is really a time commitment, and it's how much time and resources you have to undertaking that certification process. The benefits are that you can hold yourself out as a B Corp, and you have access to the entire B Corp universe, which is a significant number of companies such as Patagonia. And so it does give you an interesting network. And so to go back to our balancing, what I see is we have incorporation as a benefit corporation as your highest commitment, but also highest financial and maybe legal risk. On the other end, we have the lower commitment, and the lower risk is drafting your internal corporate policies. And somewhere in the middle are amending your governance documents to make yourself accountable to the different stakeholder populations. And also B Corp certification, which again is the one that I sort of struggle to put where it should be. And this is the thing that I think as you're going forward, you're going to have to balance. And then the final consideration is fundraising. And these are the questions that I generally get about benefit corporations is, what do investors think of this? And the truth is it's a very unsatisfying answer that all lawyers love to give. It depends. Your investor is, as I'm sure you're all finding out, is somebody that fits with your idea and fits with your vision. And that might mean as well somebody who understands what you're trying to do as a social investor. There are institutional investors that are starting to require more of public companies and starting to require more of the stakeholder approach. And maybe that will trickle down. There's more understanding within the investment community that investing into companies that are focused on multiple stakeholder decision-making is a better investment. But again, as we said before, you are telling the investor that their investment is not what you care solely about. There are other things that you're going to be taking into consideration, and that might give them some pause. And so it's something that is important to think about as you're approaching investors is who is going to be aligned with the mission that you have, and how is it that they're going to approach that? And also, what is it that they might require from you in return for what it is that you are offering? That's a lot. How best do you merge everything that we're talking about into what it is you're trying to accomplish? And I will say this, as entrepreneurs, you all are creative problem solvers. You understand that everything is not going to look perfect the way that you want it to from the get-go. And so my advice to you is, this says pick a lawyer who understands what you're trying to do, which I do think is important, but pick a team that understands what you're trying to do and understands your risk appetite for what it is that you're undertaking. Give consideration to where you are in your development as an organization, what you're trying to accomplish, what your budget and resources are, and give yourself room to grow. First off, I commend you for wanting to incorporate these values into your organization. I think it's important, and I do think you'll find that it makes you a successful organization. But that said, you don't need to boil the ocean in your first year. There are ways that you can incorporate this that allows you to do it mindfully in ways that allow you that room to grow and allow that room to adapt. And how you do that is do it in ways that make sense for what your budget and your resources are, so that you can make sure that you are putting in place those values and at the same time allowing your organization to flourish and grow. Thank you so much for your time and your attention. I really appreciated seeing your faces and getting the chance to talk to you about something that I feel very passionately about and really enjoy talking about, and would be more than happy to answer any of your questions.